Listo, Juan Daniel, empecemos entonces.
Listo, muy buenos días con todos. Hoy tenemos la última charla presentada por Azrae de esta serie de charlas que titulamos Energía e Industria. El día de hoy tenemos a Howard Shapiro, que nos va a hablar acerca de Exergía y la industria y un poco de eficiencia energética también. Entonces, por favor, Howard.
Antes de pasar con Howard, quiero darles una pequeña introducción, una pequeña biografía de Howard. Él es el profesor emérito en la Universidad Estatal de Iowa en Estados Unidos, en el Departamento de Ingeniería Mecánica. Él estableció y fue codirector de dos centros muy importantes ahí en la universidad, el Centro para la Investigación en Energía de Edificios y también el Centro para el Análisis y Diagnóstico de la Energía. Además, después de este puesto, él pasó a ser el vicedecano de programas de pregrado en esta misma universidad. Su educación la obtuvo en la Universidad Estatal de Ohio, tanto su pregrado como su masterado y doctorado, y sus áreas de interés se enfocan en eficiencia energética, reducción de desperdicios y aumento de productividad industrial, además de termodinámica, conversión de energía y temas de ventilación y aire acondicionado. Entonces, con eso, déjenme me contacto con él para darle paso. Y muchas gracias a Howard por estar con nosotros.
Well, hello, everyone. Can you hear me? I hope so. I'm going to, and you can see my screen. So I'm going to go through my presentation. I'm very pleased to have this opportunity, and I want to thank you for asking me to do this. The topic is how to make industry and everything else more efficient. And as I say, it makes dollars and cents. So it really is about energy, about thermodynamics, and about economics. So let me get started. So just a quick summary of a few ideas. Everything has energy. And as we all know, energy is conserved, which is a good thing. And we store it in matter in many, many different ways. So when we use the term energy crisis, it doesn't make any sense. Well, there's plenty of energy, and in fact, energy is conserved, so we never lose any energy. So that isn't really the issue, although it's the common way that we talk about it. So it's useful when we can change its form and transfer it from one thing to another. So if we think about the toast coming out of the toaster, it's going to cool off. But the kitchen will be slightly warmer. The toast will become the temperature of the kitchen, but all the energy is still there. So there isn't any question about energy being lost. Now, we also know that things happen in a certain way, and we cannot make them happen in a different way. So in the case of this toast, we used some fossil fuel probably to make the electricity that ran the toaster. We heated up the toast from room temperature. Once the toast cools, of course, we've got all the energy dispersed around the kitchen and we can't put it back. So, of course, in thermodynamics, we call this an irreversible process. And all processes are irreversible. Well, What we've lost is the potential that existed in the fossil fuel. That's gone once we're done. And we cannot get that back, all right? Now, I'm pretty old, but the fossil fuel was made long before even I was born. So the idea that somehow it's going to come back is not going to happen. And on each step, we lose potential. And it's inevitable that that's going to happen because that's how processes happen. So it's not wasteful. It's basically the way things happen. It's the quote cost of converting energy along the way. That's how things happen, all right? So with that background, we have two statements or principles in thermodynamics. We have the first law, which conserves energy, and we have the second law that talks about entropy and how entropy is created when we have irreversibilities. And that talks about the direction of processes. And everything that we want to know is contained in these. But energy, we have a pretty good concept of. I've got something that's at a height and I drop it, or something is hot. So energy is something that we have a pretty good sense about. But entropy doesn't have a very good physical sense. It's a mathematical thing. And of course, people like me who love thermodynamics love entropy. But when it comes down to it, it's very hard to understand physically. So there's another way that we can construct this that would help us understand it physically and would have a better economical direction for us to study. And that's exergy. Here's just a thought experiment. In other words, we're not going to do it, but we're going to think about it. And it helps us understand the idea of exergy. If you go to the gas station and you fill up your tank, it's the exergy that you want, and that's what you're paying for. So what does that mean? Well, exergy and energy are related, but they're different thermodynamic ideas. So if we think about the fuel burning and the surrounding air is at some temperature, just think about what happens over time as we burn this. Eventually, because all the air around there warms up, it all comes to almost exactly the same temperature because we have a finite amount of fuel, but it's ever so slightly increased because, of course, the heat transfers out to the surroundings. So really, the final condition is almost exactly the same as the initial condition. Now, as we said, energy is conserved, so the total amount of energy is constant. And all the energy that was, quote, released in the combustion is still there. But when we started, there was a big opportunity. That hot flame could have been used for some purpose. For example, it could have run a heat engine and produced work. So it really has tremendous opportunity. When we're done, that opportunity is completely gone. So the question is, how well did we use the opportunity? In this case, all we did was burn the fuel, transfer the heat to the surroundings, and waste the opportunity. Had we done something else, we could have gotten something from it. Well, when we started, it really also has economic opportunity. In other words, that fuel could be used to do something that would have economic value. But when we're all done, the economic value is also gone. Well, exergy is the thermodynamic property that quantifies this potential for use. And so therefore, energy doesn't have economic value, but exergy does. So let's see what that means. If I have something that's hot at a certain pressure, high pressure, might have some velocity, and is at some elevation, its state has some opportunity to make useful opportunity relative to the surroundings, which are at some pressure and temperature of the atmosphere and the surface of the earth. So there is that potential. Well, the exergy is the maximum theoretical work I could get from something at that condition relative to what we call the dead state, which is zero elevation, zero speed, and the temperature and pressure of the surroundings. So you could think of it as if I have a system at a certain condition and I undergo a process, it goes to a different condition. The question is, how much opportunity remains? If I waste it, it's gone. If I transfer it, I can use some of it, and it depends how I do that. Well, heat and work transfer exergy. But along the way, unless we do it reversibly, friction, heat transfer, mixing, and other things destroy some of that opportunity. So exergy is destroyed by real effects like friction, not waste, just real effects. Now, if I can minimize those, I can, of course, save exergy. Well, we could do the first law and the second law in terms of energy and exergy instead of energy and entropy. And we would have a much better physical understanding of what's going on. And those of you who are studying thermodynamics, I'm sure, are studying this idea of exergy. And if not, you should. Okay. So here's the thing, though. To reduce the waste of exergy, the destruction of exergy, we have to consider trade-offs. How fast we do something can make it less efficient, and because it do it faster, we waste or destroy more exergy. But there's an economic issue here. If I do something really slowly, maybe it doesn't have a lot of economic value. I need to do it fast in order to create. So I accept the waste of or destruction of exergy because I say, well, it's worth it economically, and I have to look at the cost-benefit relationship. Similarly, if I want to do something and reduce exergy destruction, the cost of the system might be much, much, much bigger because it has to be bigger and slower and this and that. And so therefore, I reduce the operating cost, but I have a much bigger fixed cost. So these are decisions that must be made. And guess what? We call that engineering. That's what we do in engineering. We look at those trade-offs and we decide what is the best choice. So sometimes saving more money is not better than spending more money but getting other opportunity. All right. So even though these are facts, they are the facts of life. in fact, science. However, many times people in governmental positions and legislative positions try to pass laws that violate these ideas. Well, of course, you can't repeal them, even though they are the laws, but you cannot repeal them. They are going to dominate no matter what choices you make. All right, so let's look at why energy efficiency makes sense. First of all, from a very, very wonderful book by Amory Lovins of the Rocky Mountain Institute. By doing all the studying how we could reduce energy use, he says we could save half the oil and gas and 3/4 of the electricity being used in the United States. Half the oil and gas and 3/4 of the electricity, and still accomplish the things that we're trying to do by incorporating more efficient processes. Now, again, it's going to cost us more to make the systems, but we're going to save money because we're not going to do this. All right. Now, the other thing is, we hear all the time that, well, we should just simply get more natural gas, get more oil. Why not? Just increase the production of energy. Well, we can't produce our way out of this problem. Renewables do not have the density to compete economically. So here's the thing. If we wanted to use renewable energy, that's a good thing. However, fossil fuel has tremendous economic opportunity because it's so packed with exergy. And therefore, it's hard for renewables to compete with that. But the best environmental effect is to not use it in the first place. So energy efficiency makes renewable resources more economical because it has no environmental impact. And one could say that the best BTU or kilowatt hour is the one that is never produced in the first place from a point of view of the environment. Let's consider that. If you're motivated by worrying about global warming, or if you're motivated by worrying about the waste products in the atmosphere, if that worries you or motivates you, then you want to be more efficient and use less energy because you're not going to have that impact. And on the other hand, it turns out, even if you're not motivated by that, and there are people who don't believe that, they don't believe it for whatever reason, and that's fine. The fact is that if I use less energy, it simply costs me less. So there's no environmental impact if I don't use it. And guess what? I can save money. There's the fundamental argument. Again, Amory Lovins talked about this. He calls it megawatts versus negawatts. Nega meaning negative. A megawatt avoided has economic value greater than a megawatt produced. And this is from Lovins. In other words, if I don't make it, it has more economic value than if I make it and sell it. It's cheaper for the consumer. From the power industry standpoint, building power plants, fossil fuel power plants, is extremely expensive. And if you look at least, I know in my area of the United States and in many other places, and I'm not quite sure what the situation is in Ecuador right now. But when a power company has to build a power plant, that's an unbelievably expensive investment. On the other hand, what we see, at least in mid-America, is we see people, power companies building wind generators. And yes, they're all over the place, but the truth is it is way less expensive for them to build those than to build a power plant. And they don't have to worry about, quote, the environmental effect. As far as nuclear, there's almost none of that going on anywhere in the world. And the reason is because it's way too expensive. All right. According to the BP statistical review, at least in 2017, that was the most recent one I found. In Ecuador, the use of oil is 76% right now, or at that time, of energy produced. Natural gas is a pretty small amount. Hydroelectric is actually quite big, and that's a really good method from, of course, the environmental standpoint. There's no question about that. And other renewables is very, very, very little. But electricity consumption, in terms of billions of kilowatt hours, if you go back to 1980, you were down below 1 or below 3. Now you're almost close to 20. And in the last, let's say 15 years, it's increased tremendously. All right, here's the idea. Let's take light emitting diode LED bulbs. They last 25,000 hours, whereas an incandescent bulb lasts 1,000 hours. Just think about that. 25 times as long. They use about 20% of the energy for a comparable incandescent bulb. So they last 25 times as much. They use 1/5 the amount of energy. And yes, they cost more, but if you look at the return on investment, it's about 80% less to own and operate an LED than it is an incandescent bulb to accomplish the same lighting task. Well, why don't we make everybody use LEDs? Let's get rid of incandescents. Think about it. People will save money. What's bad about that? And the environmental impact is way less because we're only using 1/5 of the amount of energy in order to run this. So the environmental impact is unbelievably reduced. The Department of Energy of the United States did an estimate that if every American home replaced just one light bulb with an LED, one, they would be able to light more than 3 million homes, save more than $60 million, and prevent greenhouse gases equivalent to more than 800,000 cars. Why doesn't everybody have to use LEDs? Public policy should make this happen. Solar energy, what about that? That's an interesting option. Well, we got to think about matching the end use with the source. Solar energy, if we use just direct solar energy, only happens when the sun shines, right? So that means at night it's not shining. Further, solar energy is diffuse. So we need large collection area in order to collect the energy. And so we get a big fixed cost. Further, land and area and equipment costs, rather than for electricity, photovoltaic cells might make the most sense. But better yet, water heating on a local basis, passive solar, let's think about that. If we design our structures to capture solar energy in the winter, or in a way that helps us reduce other uses of energy, that's just built into the design. It's not an extra cost. Further, energy efficient designs. That is, if our structures have more insulation and are much more, and they're oriented exactly right based on the particular way in which the sun shines most of the time, we use less fuel to heat our houses. Well, guess what? That means that gas, natural gas, if we're using it, is available for other things, but we don't use as much. So solar energy used passively is probably the best choice, but there are many opportunities to use it actively as well. Here's another example. At least in most places in the United States, and again, I'm going to say, you've got a lot of hydroelectric, so it may be that the hydroelectric, if that is used appropriately, makes perfect sense for electric cars. Think about it. If I use a hydroelectric source, I store electricity in my car and I run my car on electricity. That's fantastic. It has no environmental impact whatsoever. What could be better? But if I use fossil fuel, and regretfully, we use too much, we're still using a lot of fossil fuel to make electricity. If I use electricity based on fossil fuel, and I look at the efficiency of electricity production from fossil fuel and then combustion within, compared to combustion within the engine, it turns out that there isn't any more efficiency in using electricity than there is in just using a good combustion engine. So right now, if you're using fossil fuel to make electricity, electric cars are a bad idea. On the other hand, if electricity is made from renewable sources, electric cars are the greatest thing. Now, 20, 25 years from now, when most energy is made from renewable, fantastic. Electric cars will make perfect sense. Hybrid cars, which basically use fossil fuel, are the best option right now. I happen to have the car that's on the lower right is a Hyundai Ioniq. I happen to have one, and I'm crazy about trying to use less energy. I fill it up with gasoline, and I drive the speed limit. I don't go faster. People hate me because they're all on they want me to go faster. All right. But if you look at the frictional resistance as a function of velocity, it goes up as the cube of velocity. So if I can stay at a reasonable rate in terms of kilometers per hour, I don't waste very much energy. For most trips, It takes me 5 minutes longer. So what? So speed is really irrelevant. People go fast in cars simply because they like to go fast, not necessarily because they need to get somewhere fast. If I need to and I'm in a big hurry, that's a different story. But most of the time, if it takes me 2 or 3 or 5 minutes longer to make a trip, so what? All right. Now, on top of that, what this car does is it when you decelerate or when you go downhill, it takes the kinetic energy and it stores it as electricity and means that you don't need to use as much uh, fuel. Further, if you then go and use uh, accelerate slowly and not rapidly, it uses electricity to do it. So you're not using any of your fossil fuel. In miles per hour, I get over 60 miles per hour in my car. I'm very proud of that. But more importantly, think about it. If we simply required automobiles to get higher efficiency over time, which at least in the United States was a policy that was required, and auto companies hated it because they didn't want to do it. Of course, oil companies hate it because they don't sell as much oil. And in recent years, those policies have been delayed. But that makes perfect sense because we could go more and more to this kind of technology. And I always say, when you drive a car, you push this one thing and it goes forward with your foot. You push this other thing and it stops. You have this other thing that you go like this and it goes that way or that way. You don't care if you've got a hybrid. You don't even know. So most people shouldn't have to make the choice. This ought to be how cars are made, trucks are made, vehicles are made over time because we would use less energy. As far as cost is concerned, they would not cost more because when they're mass produced, the costs will come way down. Now, in my case, my car, I believe that this technology cost me roughly $3,000 more for my vehicle than I would have paid otherwise. Well, having that technology, I'm saving lots of money on gasoline. So it turns out I didn't even spend any extra money. All right. Now we're relying more on fossil fuel and nuclear power plants. We reduce our dependence on foreign oil, but rely on our utility companies instead. So we're not importing oil to run our cars when we use plug-in cars. I'm talking about electric plug-in. But we're using more fossil fuel or nuclear power, and we don't increase our efficiency. Why don't we just increase our efficiency as I just described? Drive less and use more mass transit. This makes sense. All right, so I've gotten through a couple concepts that are very important for me. Energy efficiency is a good idea. We use less fossil fuel. We avoid dealing with nuclear energy. We greatly reduce our dependence on imported oil. We reduce our carbon footprint and our environmental impact, and we make renewable energy sources like solar, wind, and biomass much more cost effective. Energy efficiency ought to be implemented everywhere to the extent possible. All right, so that's my energy efficiency concept. And it's valid or valuable in our homes, in our industries, in our transportation. It's a valuable idea. If we would simply make things more efficient, it would be a great idea. Now I want to I want to finish by talking about another concept which interplays with that, particularly in industrial applications. So if we think about in industry, let's say manufacturing in particular. There's energy cost. I mean, they use utilities, they pay for energy, and that's part of the cost of creating a product, whatever it is they're making. So energy is an important cost. At the same time, the amount that they produce has economic value in the marketplace. And so if I can produce more with the same energy, I'm going to make a lot of money, even if I don't reduce the energy. Now, I've just argued for reducing the amount of energy and being as efficient as possible. At the same time, I want to think about how to be as productive as possible. So I'm going to give a final industrial example that illustrates the idea of productivity. Consider a foundry where we're going to melt scrap iron, in other words, waste iron. We collect it, we melt it, and we make castings, and then ultimately take those castings and machine them to make parts for whatever. So basically, we're taking scrap iron, waste iron, we're melting it, we're making castings, and we're going to then use those castings to make machine parts. We can burn fossil fuel and run our melting furnace. And that's a very common way in which this is done. So we use fossil fuel, we melt our iron. So we build a fire, we put in the scrap metal, we melt it, then we pour it, and then we have to basically, after we pour all of it out, we got to clean our system. And it takes about 24 hours to make one big pot of melted iron, about 24 hours. And that's a typical foundry using a coke or coal type of firing. Now, we have environmental effects because there's ash from the coal burning and there's slag left over from the melting that has to be disposed of, and that's an environmental issue. And some of it is even hazardous. Further, when we burn the coal to make the flames, we've got a lot of emissions, particularly particulate emissions. And there's a tremendous amount of maintenance. So this type of operation is commonly used, but those are some issues. All right, what can we do instead? Well, no, actually, let's look at after we melt it. Let's continue with the casting process. If this would be the floor and where we have casting, then we have to build molds. Now, what that means is we take sand and we build it and we make the shape in which we're going to pour our casting. It takes about 2 hours to build those molds. 4 hours after we pour it, because it has to cool so it can solidify. And then finally, we got to clear it all out so we could rebuild the molds for the next cycle of casting. So this is a typical process that is in use. How could we increase production? For one thing, if we had a bigger floor. Secondly, what if we used an electric arc furnace? Now let's think about that. Not burning coal and making a big pot of melted iron Instead, using electricity, which much more rapidly can melt the iron with electric arc. Well, we still have the slag disposal, but we don't have the emissions. All right, so that's a good thing. We also don't have the ash and the coke disposal that we had with the slag, with the coke-fired machine system, and there's no emissions. There's a little bit of outgassing, but that happens in both cases. There's a lot less maintenance, but more important, but equally as important, it takes less time to melt a container or a tub of iron in this case. So if we think about the casting process, we can build molds, we can pour, and we can break down on different parts of the floor using one pot full of stuff. But then we can do it again. And maybe more time in the same 24-hour period, we can get, and in some cases that I've actually looked at in real foundries, we can get twice as much metal produced, twice as many produced products in a 24-hour period than we did with the other kind of system. Now it's going to cost a lot of money to get rid of that coke-fired cupola thing and replace it with an electric arc melter. But we can do continuous pouring rather than batch 24-hour do it. We can pour, and in the course of 24 hours, get at least 50% more production. What does that mean? The output is greatly, greatly enhanced. Now, even though it costs a huge amount of money to replace the equipment in order to do it a different way, the output has tremendous production value. In other words, the biggest value economically is the thing you sell. So production per unit of energy goes way up, even though it cost me a bunch of investment to build that new system. The operating cost is lower, but more importantly, because the production is so increased, I pay back that investment in no time. Now, in an example that we did in a foundry near here, it was something like $12 million to replace the system. And we estimated that in 2.5 years, they would return that investment. So that means after that, guess what? They're making a huge amount more money, even though they made that giant investment. Further, maintenance, hazard waste, and other disposal issues are reduced. So conceptually now, making more per unit of energy is a very, very important value, as well as using less energy to do a job. So both of those strategies work. In industrial settings, if I can use LED lights instead of incandescent lights, why not? But that's only 5% of my cost of doing business. So it turns out I might as well, and there's no reason why I shouldn't make more money. Everybody loves that. At the same time, if I could increase my production by 50% per unit of energy use, guess what? Huge economic incentive. So why don't we just do this everywhere? So summary, reduce energy use by making things more efficient. The investment in energy efficiency, like buying the LED bulb, returns on investment in very, very short time. Public policy could say, hey, give everybody LEDs. In fact, the local utility in Boston, Michigan, Boston, Massachusetts, Commonwealth Edison, a number of years ago, they gave everybody high efficiency light bulbs. They gave them away. Why? Because they avoided having to build a new power plant. And the return on investment from them was tremendous. Even though they sold less electricity, they made more money. Meanwhile, the people who got the free LEDs used less energy. Not a bad thing. And then finally, if we can make investments that will make us more productive, in other words, produce more per unit of energy used, that's another giant benefit. In both cases, we reduce the environmental impact. All right, that's my talk, and I'd be happy to answer questions if you have them. Regretfully, as I said, I can't hear you, so we're going to have to do it on the.
Okay, go ahead, Alex Torres. Okay.
One of the problems of the usage of clean energy is storage. So do you know how battery cells are improving for this new demanding technologies? Very good question. Battery storage is extremely important, particularly for things like wind and solar. The battery storage is important because, of course, the wind blows when it blows, but you need to use that energy other times. Further, similarly, the sun shines. All right. There are tremendous improvements in battery technology that are on the way, which will go to the megawatt size of battery storage. Right now, small batteries are still good. So for a house, if you have a solar collector, you can get battery storage that's perfectly adequate and use it, for example, maybe to run your electric car, if you think about it. If you've got an electric car, you probably could have enough electric collection in the course of most days that you could store ample amount in order to run your car for whatever you need. And battery storage for that is highly available. On the other hand, if you're a utility, in order to get enough storage, you need to have megawatt size. And we're very close to that, I understand, but at this point, we still don't have good megawatt size storage. So that's a problem. Now, another thing that some utilities are doing is they're giving people the opportunity to put solar collectors and to sell the excess energy they have back to the grid, which reduces the need for them to generate. And so they're willing to pay you for electricity that you create from solar energy because they don't need to produce as much. So greenhouse gas emissions have been reduced during the lockdown. However, average global temperature has been record high these past few months. Do we have to rethink the whole greenhouse effect, or what is happening? My understanding, that's a great question. My understanding is that, first of all, the global temperature it isn't something that we're talking about a few months effect. We're talking about effects over years and potentially decades. So if you look at the global temperature, the average global temperature, or the CO2 level in the atmosphere, and you look at those, if you go back, you can go back like 200 years and see what the curve looks like and how it has gone up. And if you look at from the Industrial Revolution in the mid 1800s, and then into more recent times, you see a giant spike in CO2. And if you plot the average temperature, you see a very, very similar trend, but it lags. So there's that. The other thing that people confuse sometimes is weather versus climate. Okay. The weather changes. It goes up, goes down. Weather is a continuous process. And it's like this. But climate happens over a longer period of time. So will we see an effect of the greenhouse gas emission being reduced during the COVID time? Maybe. But overall, we have to lower this on a consistent and long-term basis for it to have a big effect. As far as nuclear energy is concerned, I don't get why the industry avoided it. I mean, it costs are quite high, but does not nuclear energy have a high usable power? I think that nuclear energy, there's a couple things. If I'm a utility and I'm going to create, I want to make an investment. Okay. What are my choices? Coal, natural gas, nuclear, and wind or solar. Those are pretty much my choices. As far as those different options are concerned, okay. If I was going to do coal versus gas, coal is way more expensive to do, so I'm going to do gas. And the other thing is I can turn up the gas and make more when I need it, and I can turn it down when I don't, and it's a lot easier. Nuclear, well, I've got two big issues there. One of them is that, again, it's pretty much a constant output, whether I need it or not. So I'd use it for base load, and that would be okay, all right? But then the nuclear waste disposal question has never been answered. So what we're doing is, I have no problem living next door to a nuclear power plant. I'm not worried about radiation. I think they can design them, and they do design them, and they're safe. Yes, there have been a couple nuclear disasters in the last several decades in this world, but nothing, that's an issue, obviously, but I'm not worried about the power plant, but we have never figured out what to do with the waste. And basically, it's all being stockpiled on site, oftentimes in big swimming pools, because that's a way to keep the radiation enclosed. And until we figure out what to do with the waste, personally, I'm pretty worried about nuclear energy. At the same point, at least, again, I don't know what the environmental requirements are in other places, but in the United States, the environmental requirements for nuclear power plants cause them to be way more expensive to build. So the output is, so the cost is high. And as far as efficiency is concerned, basically, we use the same cycle to make the energy. We're just using nuclear as the heat source. When building a new power plant in the US, are renewable energy power plants more attractive and competitive price-wise compared to coal or fossil fuel? many utilities, again, are putting in wind power for a couple reasons. One of them is that they can basically on a kilowatt produced basis, they're cheaper than other options. And then further, there's the grid idea is changing. Large central power plants, you make power and you send it out. Renewable power is distributed. So we can rethink the whole thing. For example, if you've got a bunch of small towns and they have generation capability around them that's sufficient, you don't have to think about how am I going to take central power and you could think about it in a more distributed way. And many power companies are thinking of that differently. So that's one of the main incentives. I have another question. Do you think Tesla cars are really a good option for an electric car? I'm not quite sure what the question is. Do I think a Tesla is a good car? I don't know. I think it is. But basically, again, they're plug-in cars. So that means I have to have a source of electricity. And if I use fossil fuel, I don't think they're a good option. If I use renewable, I think they're a great option. Because everything turns around economy, then I think it shall be a law launched to motivate industries that uses heat for production like foundries to take advantage of cooling energy to generate electric power. What do you think about? All right. So that's related to what I would call, I think, what you're referring to is cogeneration. In other words, if I have a heat source, whatever it is, and I'm using it or a fuel, the question is, can I use it for multiple purposes? And if I can use it for multiple purposes, particularly if I need something really, really hot and I need to do something, but then I reject a lot of heat somewhere else, maybe I can also use that heat for another purpose. That's another very cost-effective idea, but again, it involves huge investment. But when it comes down to it, if I start with the original thing, eventually using the energy for a variety of different purposes. And one example of cogeneration is if I have a large heat source for a city that's running that's doing something and I'm rejecting a lot of heat. If I would then put a power cycle on the bottom of that before I ultimately reject it to the surroundings and produce electricity, or if I have steam that I'm creating for some purpose, but it's still hot after I use it, then I could use that steam for heating, then those make a lot of sense. Fusion. Oh, good question. I haven't looked into this in a while, but my understanding of fusion is this. It's a great idea. And way back sometime in the middle of the last century, when they first were able to start to generate the fusion idea, the question is, can we do it? And the answer is we still don't know how to do it. So if we could do it, it's a great idea. I mean, fusion is fantastic because it doesn't have any of the issues of fission. At the same time, at this point, we still don't really know how to do it in a commercial way. We can demonstrate the concept, but physics we haven't gone beyond understanding the physics to be able to create that. So. Nowadays, what is the political situation in the US about fostering energy efficiency in industry? Well, it's a good question. We might want to wait until November to see what the answer is, but there's two things. It's interesting. I think that when the energy, like the fossil fuel industry in particular, the energy producers, when they have tremendous political influence, then the question becomes, how do I protect that business? Then they want to sell more. They don't want to be regulated. And if they have enough political influence, they can basically make their politics, if you will, dominate. And if you look at in the last few years, that's exactly what happened. As far as fostering energy efficiency in industry, again, what the government doesn't understand well enough, in my opinion, is that if they foster it by making it happen, the government makes money. Why? Because if a company uses less energy, they have less deduction and they pay more tax. And if you look at how much tax they pay compared to what energy, but to what they would have paid, the investment of the government, if you will, in helping them or giving them incentives to improve efficiency pays back money to the government, but they don't understand that. As far as sharing the presentation, I'll send it to Juan and he can certainly do that. Do you think we will achieve carbon neutrality before the point of no return regarding global warming? Should a carbon emission tax be introduced? There are a lot of strategies. Carbon emission tax would certainly be one way to do it, but I guess I would believe that the better way to do it is, as I said, for the government to increase efficiency standards over time. Let's take automobile standards. There's no reason why those shouldn't be increased by 25 to 50% over the next 15 years. In other words, force the manufacturers to use the kind of technology I was describing in order to reduce, to improve the efficiency. Give people incentives to insulate their houses. Basically invest government dollars, government money in making people use less energy. That's the best. Now, as far as an emission tax is introduced, what you're doing there is you're saying, basically, if you do this, you're going to pay. At the same time, if I look at it and I say, all right, but I'm going to still make plenty of money, it doesn't give me the same incentive. So now, as far as carbon neutrality, I don't know what the point of no return is. It would seem to me that what we have to do is we have to basically reduce our energy use, thereby reducing our carbon emissions. And over time, it will have the effect. Have we gone too far? Again, I don't know enough about that to know. I know that if you look at the polar ice, it's disappearing. If you look at the ocean levels, it's going up. So I don't know what the point of no return is, but I think that we can do a lot in a short period of time to reduce our emissions. Ecuador is a highly active volcanic zone. Could geothermal energy be a good alternative? How is this technology developing? Geothermal is a fantastic source. And in places where that's an option, it's a great choice. Now, I haven't done the analysis or looked at the numbers to say, is again that better than using alternative energy that's cheaper to produce? But if you've got good high temperature steam from the ground as a source, or if you have hot lava or whatever as a source, it seems to me that it makes perfect sense. As far as the technology, I think that the technology is there. The question is it economical enough to be better than the other choices? So now, as far as a question for the whole world, geothermal is wonderful if we can use it. The problem is there aren't that many places that have it. So the fact that you have it is wonderful. And if you have it, I say use it if you can use it economically. At the same point, many places just don't have the option. Continuing with the concept of fission, what do you think about theoretical usage of energy of a whole star like the Dyson sphere? Do you think if this machine were built, would stop worrying about energy, or the opposite? Regretfully, I don't know anything about the Dyson sphere, so I can't answer that. Sorry. I'll have to look it up. I'll Google it. When people talk about energy efficiency, normally don't compare all what is involved. For instance, on electric car production, what amount of energy is required, including, or the batteries? And for electric car recharging, same question. When I think in terms of what refers to this subject, it is more important a good mechanical design to keep constant torque more than increasing horsepower. If I understand your question, power is an exergy related idea, in that if I want to do something fast, and I mentioned this earlier, then I have to just live with the fact that it's going to be less efficient. It's going to destroy more exergy in order to make it happen fast. All right. So if I want power, then that's going to basically cost me more. Can I do some things to increase power that still are good in terms of mechanical design and still allow me to increase power without too much more waste? The answer is yes. There's no question about that. But at the same time, overall, when I want to try to do something fast, it's going to be less efficient than if I let it happen more slowly. Now, as far as that concerned, let's think about again, efficiency of in terms of vehicle. If I, like I said, I don't go fast, so I don't waste as much, so I don't need as much power. Now, I still need power if there's if there's something and I have to accelerate very quickly to get around it or something. There's no question I need power. But the fact is I very seldom use that power. So on average, I use less. And that also relates to the size of the vehicle. Some people want vehicles that, and I see it all the time. You see vehicles that they're thinking about basically cars that are on racetracks, and they love that, and that's what they want. Fine, if that's what you want, but as far as I'm concerned, I don't care about that. At the same time, the same vehicle that's designed to do that will be less efficient on average for normal use. So when I see people, so it comes down to design to get the maximum opportunity for power when I need it, but the maximum efficiency when I don't need extra power. Wankel engines are not considered to produce energy like gensets where you see its most common use, diesel piston engines. The Wankel engine, I don't know what happened to it. I think it was a good idea compared to a ordinary piston cylinder engine, the reciprocating engine. And it was also from a standpoint of continuous, the thing that made it so good, in my opinion, was the way it worked. There was essentially continuous power developed instead of, but if you look at a reciprocating engine and you look at it running at what, 2,000 revolutions per minute, there still isn't a heck of a lot of difference as far as I can tell. And so I just think it never really caught on. Do you think renewable energy is going to be capable enough to sustain the lifestyle that we are having right now, as we see we have increment the use of energy in an astronomical way? The answer is, I believe that renewable energy can do that. And I think that it's entirely possible that with renewable energy that we can still sustain things in the way that we're accustomed to. Now, the answer is, as I said, part of it is storage. If you look at, for example, you have hydroelectric. That's something that just basically is renewed continuously. You don't have to worry about it, okay? On the other hand, if I do it with wind power, as I said, I could think of distributed energy, but I could think of enough power, if you will, to sustain whatever I want locally. And it turns out, because these wind generators can do something like, some of them can do actually megawatts. That's a pretty good. If I have 50 of those in some rural region, I can do anything I want. Now, storage is also important there, but when it comes down to it, the question is, can we put in the way to generate it in a renewable way to accomplish what we want? And as far as the incremental increase that I showed, the other thing though is energy efficiency answers that question. And I think that's the other technology that ought to be put in. And energy efficiency and different energy sources go together in order to create an economic choice. Well, it's been my pleasure, and I'm very honored to have had this opportunity, and I wish you all well, and I look forward to staying in touch with you, Juan, and best to everybody. Thank you.
Thanks. Muchas gracias a todos por ser parte de nuestros eventos de ASRAE. Es muy grato saber que ustedes tienen tantas preguntas y tanto interés en energía y nos han acompañado en estas 5 charlas. Y espero que podamos volver a hacer este tipo de eventos y contar con su participación. Por favor, Juan Daniel, tus palabras de cierre.
Sí, Juanse, nada, pues agradecerles a todos por todo el apoyo que hemos recibido en estas charlas. Hemos tenido bastante buena acogida en cada una de ellas y nos gusta ver cómo todos tienen un gran interés en las energías renovables. Si les interesa un poco más, pueden contactarnos a nosotros directamente en ASRAE si quieren ser parte de este grupo. Muchas gracias.